Imagine if I revealed that four-time Formula One world champion Max Verstappen had just made one of the most mysterious and revealing statements about his future at Red Bull right after Christian Horner's explosive departure. Do you really believe that this drastic change in the Austrian team's leadership will not impact the Dutch driver's choices? Well, get ready, because Verstappen's response was much more elaborate than it seems, and the details of this narrative expose tensions that could completely reshape the Formula One grid in the years to come. Let's start with the basics. Christian Horner, the man responsible for turning Red Bull from a rookie team into one of the biggest forces in Formula One for 2 decades, was removed from his role as team principal and executive director immediately after the British Grand Prix. We are talking about a person who led the team to 8 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' championships, including Verstappen's 4 consecutive titles between 2021 and 2024. Horner's departure was not a peaceful retirement or a planned change. It was a straightforward dismissal, the immediate consequence of a loss of confidence among Red Bull shareholders during an extremely sensitive period in the team's history. But why is this moment so crucial? Red Bull has been experiencing a considerable decline in performance for a year and a half, relinquishing the supremacy it had enjoyed since the beginning of the ground effect era. At the same time, the team is creating its own power unit for 2026, a colossal undertaking that could define the brand's future in motorsport. And as if that weren't enough, Max Verstappen has several termination clauses in his contract that allow him to leave the team before it expires in 2028. Coincidence? Unlikely. Now comes the most fascinating part. Reliable sources indicate that Verstappen's inner circle, including his representative, has been in frequent talks with Toto Wolff, Mercedes' team principal. Yes, the same Mercedes that signed Lewis Hamilton, currently Charles Leclerc's teammate at Ferrari, and promoted Andrea Kimi Antonelli to a full-time seat alongside George Russell. Mercedes is obviously interested in the 4-time champion, and these talks are not just polite paddock chatter. The situation becomes even more complicated when we consider the problematic relationship between Christian Horner and Jos Verstappen, Max's father. The two have always had their differences, and this family pressure has certainly influenced the shareholders' decisions. After all, keeping a team boss who is in constant conflict with the family of your main asset is not exactly a smart business tactic. Jos Verstappen has never hidden his disapproval of certain decisions made by Horner, and this family dynamic has created a complicated political environment within Red Bull. During the press conference before the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps, Verstappen was asked directly how Horner's departure would affect his future at Red Bull. His response was diplomatically worded but revealing. He stated that it would not interfere with his future decisions, that differences of perspective are common and even expected in a high-performance team. But note this interesting point. He emphasized that the only thing that matters is working on the car and making it as fast as possible, admitting that the last year and a half have not been what the team wanted. This statement represents an indirect but clear criticism of Red Bull's recent performance. Verstappen is fundamentally communicating that results are more important than personal loyalties or hierarchical structures. It is a clear message to the new management: provide a competitive car or I will evaluate other alternatives. Horner's successor is Laurent Mekies, who had been running Racing Bulls, formerly AlphaTauri. Verstappen congratulated Mekies, describing him as intelligent, determined, and experienced in different areas of the paddock. However, he was also cautious in stating that 2 weeks are not enough to assess significant changes. Interpretation: he is offering a reserved vote of confidence, but the new boss will need to prove his worth quickly. The question remains: will Max Verstappen really stay at Red Bull until the end of his career, as he stated when he signed his current contract? The Dutchman's response was brilliant in its vagueness. When pressed about the real possibility of competing for another team next year, he replied, There's also the possibility that I won't wake up tomorrow, so there wouldn't be any race. Life is uncertain. This seemingly thoughtful response is, in reality, a masterclass in sports diplomacy. Verstappen is keeping all his options open without publicly committing to anyone. He has not ruled out leaving, but he has also reconfirmed that he is happy where he is, and that his initial plan was to race for Red Bull until the end of his career. It is the kind of statement that allows for multiple interpretations and keeps all interested parties on their toes. But let's examine the viable scenarios. If Red Bull fails to return to the top in 2025, especially with new engine regulations looming, Verstappen could trigger his termination clauses. Mercedes, with its experience in power units and established structure, would be a natural destination. Imagine the impact of having Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, Max Verstappen at Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc trying to create a new dynasty at Maranello. The balance of power on the grid would be completely reconfigured. On the other hand, if Red Bull manages to bounce back under new leadership and provide a competitive car, Verstappen could well honor his desire to finish his career with the Austrian team. His emotional connection to Red Bull is genuine, and he himself has acknowledged that Horner remains like a second family to him despite his departure. The reality is that we are witnessing a defining moment not only for Max Verstappen, but for the entire Formula One. Horner's departure symbolizes the end of an era at Red Bull, and how the team adjusts to this transformation could determine whether it remains a dominant force or enters into decline. For Verstappen, the decision will be purely pragmatic. Where will he have the best opportunities to win more world titles? What is clear is that the four-time world champion is not willing to tolerate mediocrity. At 26, he still has at least a decade of his career ahead of him, and every year lost with an uncompetitive car represents a wasted opportunity to further consolidate his legacy. The pressure on Red Bull's new management is enormous, and the coming months will be decisive in determining whether they can preserve their greatest asset. And we cannot ignore the timing of this transformation. With drivers like Carlos Sainz now at Williams, Fernando Alonso renewing with Aston Martin, and young talents like Gabriel Bortoleto arriving at Sauber, the driver market is more dynamic than ever. Verstappen understands that his options are not limited to Mercedes, and this awareness certainly influences his negotiating position. Formula One is undergoing one of the biggest shakeups in recent years, with Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari, new talent such as Andrea Kimi Antonelli arriving on the grid, and now uncertainty about Verstappen's future. Every move could have a domino effect that completely reshapes the category. Do you believe that Verstappen will really stay at Red Bull until the end of his career, or could this change in team leadership be the catalyst for a historic transfer? Leave your opinion in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any news from the circus that is Formula One, and activate the bell because this story is far from over. The next chapter promises to be even more explosive.